Hello and welcome back to another episode of Chasing Excellence. My name is Patrick Cummings. Every week here on the show, we dedicate some time to exploring how we can live a life of better health and increased fulfillment. And Ben and I thank you for joining us. This week on the show, we've got Kresser. He joins us to chat about nutrient density, bioavailability, why eating a clean diet might not be enough anymore, the benefits of organ meats, and more. Chris is a globally renowned functional medicine clinician and educator. He's also the New York Times bestselling author of The Paleo Cure and Unconventional Medicine. You can find him online at Chris Kresser. Before we dive into the conversation, if you are not yet subscribed or following wherever you are watching or listening, please do. It'll help ensure you do not miss another episode and will ensure we get to continue having conversations like this into the future, which we hope certainly to do. Okay. Without further ado, here is our conversation with Chris Kresser. Okay, Chris, I wanted to start our conversation with something I know that you've been thinking about, talking about, working on a lot these days, which is nutrient deficiency. And you have a free ebook on your website that I downloaded, and I was reading in anticipation of this. And one of the things that really popped out at me, and please provide the context for this, but you were saying effectively, like, of all the people who you'll do a blood panel with, or you'll look at their particular health, 95% of people will come back to you as being deficient in some number of nutrients. And this is even though they're eating primarily whole foods, unprocessed foods, et cetera. And so that really struck me as surprising that there was, even though folks were eating that kind of prescribed diet of whole foods and not ultra processed foods, et cetera, they were still nutrient deficient. So can you just start there and just, should I be surprised at that fact?
Well, it's kind of depressing, I think, it was hard to tell my patients, hey, you're doing a lot of the right things and it's still falling short. I mean, because that's demoralizing. People are putting in a lot of effort and not getting the results they want. Well, certainly they're getting results, but they're just not getting all the way there in terms of their nutrient levels. And there are, at least 11 or 12 really clear reasons for this. I'm going to share 3 or 4 that I think are the biggest ones for most people. One is just the decline in soil quality over the last 50 years. That's been ongoing, but it's really accelerated during that time frame. And it's not that nutrients or soil doesn't contain the nutrients anymore. It's that we've disrupted the microbiome of the soil through chemical pesticides, fertilizers, herbicides, industrial agriculture techniques, monocropping. And it turns out that one of the key roles that microbes play in the soil, which incidentally they also play in our gut, is to help with the extraction of nutrients from the soil. So a plant growing in the soil with disrupted gut microbiome, even if there are enough nutrients in that soil, the plant will not be able to extract the nutrients in the same way. And then, of course, when we eat the plants, we don't get as many nutrients because the plant doesn't have them. Or if an cow eats the plants, they don't get as many nutrients. And when we eat that cow, we don't get as many. So it has a whole cascade of downstream effects. Along similar lines, we now have a global system of food distribution. So you could go to a Vietnamese restaurant and have pho, and the basil in the pho is from Guatemala. And you're in a restaurant in San Francisco or New York City. And the problem with that is that as soon as you harvest a plant out of the ground, it immediately starts losing nutritional value. So the further that plant travels before you eat it, the lower the nutrition content will be. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard the statistic that the average carrot has traveled 1,800 miles before it gets to your plate. I think those numbers are increasing as a growing amount of produce is imported from South America, China, and other parts of the world. And there are lots of studies that show that the nutrient value can decline by over 50% by the time we're eating a lot of these foods. And then a third reason is the increase in environmental toxins, which unfortunately have become ubiquitous in our food supply. So those are, heavy metals like lead, cadmium, arsenic, mercury, and then glyphosate, bisphenol A, BPA, these chemicals that are in plastics. And what happens in this situation is the particularly minerals like calcium, magnesium, they become bound up with these toxins, and then we can't absorb or utilize the minerals when they're bound to the toxins. There are other factors like medications that people take that decrease absorption. Chronic disease itself has a double whammy effect in that it increases the demand for nutrients, because when our body's under the stress of a chronic illness, we actually need more nutrients. And then it also decreases our absorption of nutrients, particularly any illness that relates to the gut, which we now know is almost all illnesses. So it's really a constellation of factors that all are converging at this point in time that we live in to make it very difficult to meet our nutrient needs from food, even when we're eating a good diet.
So I told my wife that we were going to be chatting with you today, and she actually wanted to, this is the first time she's ever asked of this, and we've had a lot of guests on the show, that she's asked, like, can I just sit in the same room? She's a massive fan. I'm a massive fan. I don't have many people that I would say I'm a massive fan of. I think Patrick would agree with that. Yeah. But everyone that listens to our show knows that when I have a question about nutrition, anyone that, and it's the world we live in with the ubiquity and the speed of which we can get answers, you type in, is grapeseed oil healthy? And you're going to get 50-50. What I do is I go, is grapeseed oil healthy /Kresser? And then whatever you say, I go with. So
well, I'm flattered. Thank you.
You're the go-to for me. So very cool conversation. And it is depressing, man. Like, you just popped everyone's bubble that, like, we're trying to do the right things. We're trying to eat clean. We're trying to eat real food. But I'd like to sit on the two things. So you talked about the soil quality, which is one that we've talked about a little bit on this show as well, but also the microbiome. And just for clarity, Chris, our listeners are probably not your normal, Health Revolution listeners. None of our listeners know that the average carrot travels 1,800 miles. So,
okay.
So can you give a little bit of
down?
Yeah. Can you give a little bit of, like, when you talk about the microbiome, because we've talked about it a little bit, but nothing to the level that you'll be able to explain what that actually means and the importance. Let's start with us before we go to, like, the soil aspect of it.
Sure. Yeah. And just to say, like, it's depressing at first, and it took me, I would say, at least a couple of years to really, like, get my head around this and fully accept it when I was first starting my career. Because I had a strong belief that we should be able to meet all of our nutrient needs from food. I actually still believe that if you really focus on the word should. In an ideal world, I would like to meet all my nutrient needs from food. I don't actually like taking supplements myself. I don't know that many people that do. If I could just eat a super healthy, clean diet and meet all my needs, I'd be thrilled. But at some point, I had to come to terms with the fact that that's not the world we're living in anymore. For lots of reasons, a few of which I just mentioned. And as soon as I did accept that, I started to explore solutions. And it turns out there are fairly simple and straightforward solutions to this problem. It's not like overcoming climate change or, eliminating all toxins from the environment, or like these big, gnarly, complex challenges that an individual cannot possibly solve on their own. This one is actually a solvable problem. So there's hope, there's a message of hope here. I just wanted to start there. The microbiome is the collection of organisms that we host primarily in our gut, but we have a skin microbiome, we have a lung microbiome, we are, as human beings, host to trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that all live together, ideally in a symbiotic relationship where we are providing a life cycle environment for these microorganisms, and in return, they do a bunch of cool stuff for us. So, for example, they help us to digest and absorb the food that we eat. They produce a lot of beneficial compounds in that process. Some of the main ones are short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, propionate, et cetera. And there's a lot of research over the past 20 years that show how essential these fatty acids that the bacteria in our guts produce are to our health and well-being. They can protect us against infections or toxins or other things that we might be exposed to. They help with elimination. There's so many roles that they play. And in the last 20 years has really been kind of a renaissance in our understanding of just how central the health of our microbiome and that microbial community in our gut is to our overall health. If you were to go into PubMed, which is kind of one of the main research databases, and you search for microbiome, and then you just put any disease after that, or any, microbiome heart disease, microbiome diabetes, microbiome macular degeneration, microbiome dementia, microbiome Parkinson's, you're going to find lots and lots of studies connecting imbalances in the microbiome to pretty much every chronic condition that humans face at this point. So it's that vital in terms of the importance. And relevant to this conversation that we're having, I mentioned briefly, one of the roles that our gut bacteria have is to help us extract nutrients from food. So if you took two people that were the same in every way, except one person had a really healthy microbiome, one person had a disrupted microbiome called dysbiosis, which means they have too many bad bacteria or yeast or viruses and not enough good bacteria, and you fed them the same meal, exactly the same, right down to the calorie, nutrient level, etc., the person with the disrupted microbiome would absorb a lot less nutrition from that same exact meal. And that's the challenge that we're facing, one of the challenges we're facing today, because so many of us grew up taking antibiotics, taking medications for acne like Accutane or tetracycline, eating a poor diet. Maybe we weren't breastfed as infants, and all of these factors conspire to cause that dysbiosis and disrupt our microbiome. So it's really a problem that many, if not most people, are struggling with in this day and age.
Okay, so we got to get to the message of hope, because so if somebody wasn't breastfed, if they did take medications, if they have a disrupted gut microbiome, what's the path to healing it, if it can be healed? And then secondarily, where's your stance on where we are now with precision medicine? Is it a type of thing where we can, because I've done this, get your stool sampled, they can analyze the microbiome. Are we there yet in these, are these companies worthwhile to explore? Can we feed specific to us? And then similar, everyone's heard about, I shouldn't say everyone, where like probiotics come in. Where's your take on the way we can improve our gut microbiome?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, it's definitely possible to significantly improve the microbiome. I mean, I have personal experience of that. I got very sick in my early 20s when I was traveling around the world in Indonesia, had a pretty devastating gut illness, and was able to recover from that and, get back to really vibrant health. And I've also helped hundreds of patients do that in my practice. I've trained thousands of healthcare professionals in those same methods who are having great success. So yes, absolutely. The good news is there's a lot that can be done, and there are some modern tools that are really helpful in that regard. Stool testing can be really illuminating if you find, for example, a fungal overgrowth, or you find gut pathogens of other, bacterial overgrowth or other types of pathogens in the gut. Then we can use either antimicrobial botanicals, herbs, to eliminate those, or in some cases, if necessary, medications. And then, there's breath testing for bacterial overgrowth in the small intestine. There are urine organic acid panels that you can take to get a sense of what's happening in the gut based on measuring metabolites in the urine. So a good functional medicine provider, integrative medicine doctor who's been trained in these techniques and has access to that kind of testing can really make a big difference. But even without that, just restoring healthy habits, eating a diet that's nutrient dense, that eliminating processed and refined foods, or at least greatly reducing them, avoiding unnecessary medications. Antibiotics, of course, are necessary at times and even life-saving. So I'm not saying don't ever take antibiotics again, but being cautious about when you take them. And, for example, if you have a cold and you go into a doctor, sometimes they'll prescribe an antibiotic, which doesn't often make a lot of sense because a cold is a coronavirus. We've all heard a lot about coronaviruses lately, but actually we knew first about the coronavirus that causes the common cold. And so taking an antibiotic is not really, would not be expected to help that situation. And it's just going to, further disrupt the gut flora and not help with the original problem. Same like with kids and ear infections. They've determined that most ear infections are viral. And yet when a kid goes to the doctor, they'll often get a prescription for an antibiotic if they have an ear infection. So just being more judicious about, when you take antibiotics, when you take ibuprofen, which can have a really big, negative impact on the gut flora. And then eating plenty of foods that actually support and nourish the gut microbiome. So one category would be fiber. So like just, and I'm not talking about like taking Metamucil. I'm just saying, eat foods that naturally have fermentable fiber, fiber that can be fermented by the gut bacteria to produce those short chain fatty acids. So that would be lots of non-starchy vegetables, nuts and seeds, legumes if you tolerate them, like lentils. These are foods that are rich in the kind of fiber that our gut bacteria really like. And then fermented foods. So yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, beet kvass. There's a whole bunch of different ferments that are out there now. And those have beneficial bacteria in them, and they really support the health of the gut microbiome. And then, Ben, we're getting to probiotics. Of course, probiotics are in those fermented foods, but then you can also take probiotic supplements, which I'm sure many people are, or they've heard of them. And there's, a pretty wide variety in terms of quality of probiotic supplements on the market. I can make some specific recommendations, but it is important to take products that are produced in a way that will ensure that they get to the colon, which is the part of your gut where they live, and aren't just broken down in the stomach. Because with a lot of products, when you take the probiotics, they'll just be destroyed by the stomach acid, and they don't make it to the colon where they're needed. So that's not helpful. But when you put all of these together, just some simple changes, cleaning up your diet, reducing your intake of things that disrupt the gut microbiome, and then layering in some fiber and probiotics, you can make a lot of progress.
I have so many things so many threads I want to pull on there. Okay, first, can you repeat what's the type of doctor and or the test that people should be going to if they want to figure out if they have a healthy gut microbiome?
So there's functional medicine is the type of medicine that I practice, and it's really an approach that's oriented towards getting to the root cause of a problem rather than just suppressing symptoms with drugs. That's the quickest way to explain it. Integrative medicine doctors will also often have this kind of training, and there are lots of different stool tests that are available on the market. The ones that we tend to use most are, there's a lab called Geneva Diagnostics. There's another lab called Doctors Data. These are the ones that are more typically available through clinicians, and they're more geared towards finding pathogens and things that really shouldn't be there in your gut. They do also give you an idea of the balance of your good and bad bacteria, which I like. But there are some other tests out there like Biome, for example, that some people might have heard of, where they'll sequence the microbiome, tell you everything that's in there, and then they'll say you should eat fewer strawberries and more kale and no peanuts. They make very, very specific recommendations like that.
What's your take on that?
I don't think we're there yet.
That's what I was asking.
That's going back to your
Biome is the one that
question.
that's the one that I tried, and it was funny. And the recommendations changed a little bit, and it just seems like the AI is like still learning.
It's still learning. It's still to be fair, it's a vast. We're talking about trillions of organisms. If you think about the complexity of an ecosystem with trillions of organisms, and I'm all for AI learning and machine learning because I don't actually think we're going to be able to figure it out with our human brains. It's just too complex. And I think that test is useful in terms of what it shows, but I don't think we're quite where we can connect what it shows to a very specific diet recommendation. Generally the recommendation is if someone has low levels of good bacteria to just eat more fiber that those bacteria can feed on and replicate. It's not like eat less strawberries or more kale, like everyone probably could do with eating a little more kale and strawberries for that matter. So it's just,
it was interesting how it kind of, rank ordered whole foods, which most people don't do. It's usually, ultra clean, semi-processed, processed. So it was a really interesting experiment and kind of going through it.
We'll get back to the show in just a minute, but first a quick word of thanks to our sponsor this week, Miracle Made. You know what's a miracle? Getting an amazing night of sleep. As someone with young kids, one of whom likes to ask if he can watch Curious George at 2 a.m. sometimes, I can attest to the importance of a solid night of slumber. That's why we're excited to partner with Miracle Made bed sheets. Miracle Made sheets are made with all-natural antibacterial silver that prevents 99.9% of bacterial growth and keeps you at the perfect temperature all night long. With Miracle Made, you can tap into the power of self-cooling temperature regulation that's been shown to improve sleep quality by over 30%. Go to trymiracle.com/excellence to get yours. If you do, you'll not only get 40% off by using the code excellence, they'll even throw in 3 free towels. They're so confident you'll love these sheets that they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you've got nothing to lose but that groggy feeling in the morning that comes after a bad night of sleep. Head to trymiracle.com/excellence and be sure to use the code excellence to save 40% off.
The conversation started with, and you mentioned again, nutrient deficiency and nutrient density. Speaking of the rank order, this is something I love to geek out about, is rank ordering nutrient dense foods. And I get it. Like, should we really be dissecting between strawberries and salmon? But can we geek out on it for a second? And
sure, of course. Yeah.
You have in your ebook, you have a list, and I've seen other ones years ago. I think it was Matt Lalonde did. I think Rob Wolf's done some before. Yeah. And it seems like Oregon meat seems to always be at the top. Do you concur?
Yeah, I'll give you the breakdown. Fortunately, we have a very recent study that was just published on this topic, and it was a landmark study because most of the previous research on that was attempting to quantify the nutrient density of foods did not consider bioavailability.
Interesting.
So, and let me just back up to define a few terms. So we all are kind of on the same page. So there's different types of nutrients we can get in food, right? There's macronutrients, so that's protein, carbohydrates, and fat. And then there's micronutrients, which are vitamins and minerals. So things like iron, B12, magnesium, calcium, etc. I would say over the last 30 years, the majority of the focus in the mainstream world has been on macronutrients. We all know this, right? Low fat diet or low carb diet, which is best? Should we eat high protein or low protein, which is best? It was really focused on macronutrients and a lot less focused on micronutrients. How do we get what's the best diet for getting all of the essential vitamins and minerals and also phytonutrients that are in plants like carotenoids, bioflavonoids, fiber, etc. And I'm glad to see that conversation is now starting to shift, and there's less focus maybe so much on low fat, high fat, low carb, high carb, low protein, high protein, and more focus on nutrient density. So nutrient density specifically refers to the concentration of micronutrients in a particular food. It's not concerned with macronutrients. It's specifically concerned with micronutrients. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about nutrient density. Bioavailability is a very key concept. It means proportion of a nutrient from a food that we actually absorb and utilize. So most people, grass, like on your front lawn, is actually pretty nutrient dense with certain nutrients. But I guarantee you, if you go and eat that grass, you are not going to absorb very many of the nutrients from that grass because they're not in a bioavailable form. A good example of this that's more related to nutrients that we would consume in a normal diet is the bioavailability of calcium in spinach. So if you look on a food label for spinach, you will see that it has 115 milligrams of calcium per serving. That sounds great, right? It's like, the RDA of calcium is 1,000 milligrams for most people. You're thinking, I'm going to get 1/10 of my daily, ration of calcium by eating that one serving of spinach. But what that food label does not say is that the bioavailability of calcium from spinach is only 5%. So of that 115 milligrams, you will only absorb 6 milligrams of calcium from eating that spinach. And the reason is that calcium has another compound in it called oxalic acid or oxalate. And oxalate binds to calcium and prevents it from being absorbed or blocks calcium absorption. So this is a huge problem because the earlier studies that were looking at nutrient density in foods did not consider that bioavailability. They would just pull data from a database and see, spinach, 115 milligrams of calcium, and just assume that that's what you were going to absorb. So this recent study, this was published in Frontiers of Nutrition by an author, Ty Beal, who's works for the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. I think it's an NGO, and their main mission is to end malnutrition around the world. And so they set out to, because they're trying to do that, they had to figure out which foods could give us the biggest bang for our buck from a nutrition perspective, because they're also working in the developing world. They're concerned about economics and access. But they will be the first people to point out that nutrient deficiency is widespread, even in the richest country in the world, United States. So it's not just a developing world problem. So they did this study, and they ranked foods according to the calories and grams needed to provide an average of 1/3 of the recommended intakes of vitamin A, folate, B12, calcium, iron, and zinc, because those are the nutrients that are of the greatest concern around the world. In other words, they're the nutrients that most people tend to be deficient in. So essentially, they were trying to ask the question, what foods could meet 1/3 of the daily need of those nutrients, and then rank them by calories. So foods with the lower score were ranked highest because that meant you only had to eat a small amount of that food in order to get the full nutrient value. So lower score is better. I'm just going to read the top 10 from their report. So liver was 11. That was at the top of the list, by far higher than anything else. Even the next one, number 2, which was another organ meat, spleen, was 62. So liver is already almost 6 times higher in nutrient density than spleen. Small dried fish, so those would be like anchovies, sardines, mackerel, herring that are dried, so the nutrients are concentrated. I know everyone's salivating right now from these top 3 foods delicious. Here.
You're just a beacon of hope and amazing. Everyone's gonna
keep going. Dark leafy green vegetables, so those might people listening probably are eating some of those. That's number 4 at 72.
Can you give just a couple of examples of what classifies as dark leafy green?
Kale, chard, spinach. Even though some of these foods do have issues with bioavailability, they are very nutrient dense, and you still get a lot of nutrition from them. Next is bivalve, so that would be like oysters. The next is kidney. Again, really common food for a lot of people in the US, not so much. Heart, numbers, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Heart is 7. Crustaceans, which are like shrimp, 8. That's 193. So even at number 8 with shrimp, we're at 193. That's what, 18 times. That's 18 times less nutrient dense than liver. Still in the top 10. Goat, 205, beef 275, eggs 281, milk 287, and then vitamin A rich fruits and vegetables. So those would be like red peppers, carrots, all the bright colored vegetables, is the last one there at 297. So good news, bad news. You know, the bottom of the list, like unrefined grains, healthy whole grains. We've heard that phrase a lot, right? Those are 1,000. Let's see here, 1,175. So over 100 times less nutrient dense than liver. You know, many, many times less nutrient dense than dark leafy greens and beef and eggs. You've got nuts at 1,829. Refined grains, which is like 60% of the calories that most Americans are eating these days. Flour,
that's like
bread,
cereal, stuff like
anything made with flour, bread, cereal, etc.
Yep.
Those are 4,000 plus. It actually went off the chart.
Let's do everyone a favor and just make a meal for people that's not like your Hannibal Lecter, like a normal, but like a salad with dark leafy greens. You got some of your bell peppers. You said beef and eggs. So kind of like a what's it called? Like a chef salad with like, is that what chef salad is with all the
you could do that. I mean, so in the morning you could do eggs, scrambled eggs, bacon. People might be surprised to hear that, but you know, I think is fairly.
What about food. I've heard you talk about this before. Can you talk about what's your take on nitrates?
Not an issue for most people. We can go down that road if you want to, but
no, I think we can stop there.
It's and then or like, you know, smoked salmon or something like that, along with the eggs and sauerkraut if people like that, or dark leafy green. If you have leftover dark leafy greens from the night before, you can just quickly heat those up, or some fruit like some berries, blueberries, raspberries, strawberries. That's a pretty nutrient dense breakfast right there. And then
the salmon, wild caught versus Atlantic or farm.
Wild caught would be ideal if you can get that. But even farm salmon still has nutritional value, and pretty good with omega-3 fats. And then
eggs. For the eggs that we're doing, do we need to go and like get them from a local farm, or can we just pull them off the supermarket shelf?
I would say local farm is number one. Second would be organic, you know, from Whole Foods or a natural market, because they're often doing a better job of sourcing.
And while you're there, pick up a goat.
Pick up a goat. Yeah. You put in, I mean, while we're on that topic, like we buy meat from either a local butcher or a local farm, like, and lots of people can do that now. You can get a quarter of a cow, you can split it with another family or friends and just get a big chest freezer and put it in your garage. And then you've got beef for months, you know, and it's way more economical than buying it from the store. You're supporting local farm. You're getting it directly from the farmer. It's great. You know, a lot of communities even have what's you might call a meat CSA. You know, people are familiar with those boxes of produce you order from a farm. You get it shipped to your house. You know, they deliver once a week or every other week. A growing number of people who raise regenerative or sustainably raised meat do this too now, where you can actually get a box of meat delivered to your house. Or there are services like Wild Pastures in the US that will ship you meat once a month or whatever frequency you want, once every week. And it's all pasture raised meat from US based farms. So there's lots of ways to do it now pretty affordably and economically. Going back to the meals, for lunch, there's lots of options, but one option that I like is a big salad, like you were saying, Ben, and you can. The great thing about this is it's so flexible. You can put like leftover meat in the salad. Like let's say I cooked flank steak the night before for dinner, I'll just chop up some of the leftover flank steak, put it on top of the salad. I might have some feta cheese or goat cheese. I do fine with dairy, and it's nutritious, as we saw from the nutrient density scale. Whole bunch of different vegetables, you know, different dark some dark leafy greens, some lettuce, maybe some arugula, some fresh herbs if I have them, and even some nuts or seeds, pistachios, pumpkin seeds, whatever. That takes less than 5 minutes to put together, and it's a super nutrient dense meal. And then dinner would just be, it's pretty simple. It's like an animal protein, like, choose any from the top of the list that I read before, and a dark leafy green, that you can cook in lots of different ways, and then some sort of starch. The starch will be less nutrient dense than the other parts of that meal, but sweet potatoes, for example, are rich in some nutrients, and potatoes are rich in potassium, which most people don't get enough of. If you really want to elevate things, that's where for dinner, if you have a ground beef dish, you chop up a little bit of liver and mix it with the ground beef, season it really well. If you don't like liver, use some like Mexican seasonings or something like that. And then you're getting some liver in your diet. If you're just absolutely not going to do that, which to be fair, I would say 95% of my patients we're just like, no, I'm not going to do that ever. I don't care what you tell me. I don't care how nutrient dense liver is. I'm just never going to eat it. You can supplement with it now. So you can take supplements that are freeze dried liver. So it's from a pasture raised cow. They take the liver, they freeze dry it, they desiccate it into a powder, and they put it in capsules. So it's literally it's just like eating liver, but it's in a dried form. You don't taste it. You don't have to worry about preparing it. And that's probably the way that I think most people are actually going to get organ meats in their diet. So like we have a organ meat supplement that has all of the organ meats that I listed on that nutrient density scale. It's got liver, kidney, heart, spleen, and pancreas. Because I can tell you that if I can get someone to eat liver, it's a huge win. I'm almost certainly not getting them to eat spleen, pancreas, and kidney. So, that's kind of a breakdown of what a good day of meals would look like. I'll add a couple of things like dark chocolate, super nutrient dense food and delicious. Lots of people like dark chocolate. So it's not like all about deprivation. Coffee, even, very nutrient dense. There's so many studies coming out about the polyphenol content in coffee, that caffeine is even beneficial. Like you can eat a really delicious and nourishing diet. This is not about deprivation. It's about really like supercharging your body and mind with everything that they need to thrive.
Where does, really quickly, where does chicken, because I think chicken is the go-to for most people when they think about adding a meat to a meal. Maybe dinner is the exception of that, but when people go out to eat, they get salad with chicken, they get a veggie dish. What's your take?
I got some bad news for the poultry lovers. So chicken on that scale, going back to the scale, chicken was 1,103. So 100 times less nutrient dense than liver. As a reminder, beef was 275. So it's about 4 times less nutrient dense than beef. And even dark leafy green vegetables and fish. So I eat chicken myself. I'm not saying don't eat chicken. And the point of this scale is not like, don't ever eat the foods that are on the bottom of the list. Like nuts and seeds are really beneficial for lots of other reasons. Even legumes and some grains can have beneficial qualities. It just means don't build your whole diet around those foods. Don't make those the primary staple of your diet. Chicken is problematic for a couple of reasons. Like I will often meet people who say, I don't eat meat, I just eat chicken. Or, I that's the only meat I eat. And I scratch my head a little bit for a few reasons. One is just the nutrient value is way lower than beef and goat for that matter, and fish and seafood and oysters, crustaceans, organ meats. The second reason is that if you're concerned about environmental impact of meat or even ethical implications of eating meat, chicken is the hardest meat to buy in a really clean way. So you can get 100% pasture raised beef in almost every supermarket now. Like even like Vons, Safeway, Smith's, the not groovy Whole Foods, like even just your general market, they're almost all selling 100% pasture raised beef. That's a cow that grows that from its whole life, eats grass out on the pasture and lives basically the exact same life that it would have lived, in any other time or place. Chicken, even when you see like cage-free chicken, what that usually means is they're in a barn and had access to a tiny little patio outside, connected to the barn. If you were envisioning like a chicken just roaming around, eating grubs and worms and living, in the same way that a cow would on the pasture, that is rarely the case. That you pretty much have to buy chicken directly from a farmer to get that level, that quality of chicken. And then, just thinking about it from ethical terms, like one life versus one life, like a cow dies and feeds who knows how many people with that life. A chicken feeds, especially if you've ever bought a truly pasture raised chicken, those things are scrawny. They're like, they barely feed a family of 3.
Yeah, but those rotisserie chickens from Whole Foods, man.
Yeah. So anyhow,
you could eat a whole one of those like in the checkout line.
I'm saying just like, again, don't be a chickenitarian. Like if you're concerned about nutrient density.
What about like the opposite of that? Is there any concern of certain nutrients potentially getting too much of them? So I've heard this in other ways, and this is kind of like the when people poo-poo the liver thing, is that it ranks so high because it's so high in particular nutrients, and that it kind of that's what skews the scale. Is there a concern for that?
There is in the case of some nutrients. There are certain nutrients like vitamin C, vitamin K2. We don't really know of an upper limit for them other than like with vitamin C, bowel tolerance. If you take, too much vitamin C, you're going to be going to the bathroom a lot throughout the day. But other than that, we're not really aware of like a toxicity range for vitamin C. It's hard to get yourself in trouble with vitamin C is what I mean, especially from food. It would be almost impossible to eat too much from food that you couldn't handle. That's not the case with some other nutrients. So vitamin A is one example. At very high doses, vitamin A can be toxic. And I haven't seen this very much in my practice, but I've heard of people who are eating like, 1 or 2 servings of liver a day, who really like take that to the, the full conclusion, and they can have problems with too much vitamin A and also iron, because liver is a really dense source of iron. There's a condition called hemochromatosis, which is fairly common as a genetic condition. It affects about 1 in 200 people of Northern European descent. And that's a condition that causes aggressive iron storage. So most of us, if we eat too much iron, we just excrete it. It's not a problem. For these people with hemochromatosis, if they eat too much iron, it just accumulates in the body over and over and over, builds up, and it can literally rust. It's like oxidative damage, so it rusts our internal organs, and it can be fatal. Before they understood this condition, it was fatal. And I still find people who have it who didn't know that they had it. So that's another one. Calcium, you can overdo, particularly with supplements, not so much with diet, but a lot of people are taking very high dose calcium supplements, and it's been shown in the scientific literature that can increase the risk of kidney stones and heart disease. Because what happens is, instead of calcium being deposited in your bones or your teeth, which is where we want it, it gets deposited in our arteries, which is definitely where we don't want it. And what it does is it calcifies the artery, makes it very stiff, and then because of that, increases the risk of heart attacks and strokes. So those are 3 examples where you do have to be careful.
We'll get back to the show in just a minute, but first, a quick word of thanks to one of our sponsors this week, Blue Chew. Gentlemen, you know how important it is to connect with your significant other emotionally, intellectually, and physically. You know that living a happy, healthy, long life depends on it. And while a strong sex life might not be the most important element of a romantic partnership, there's no question it is an essential ingredient. Blue Chew wants to make sure you are at your best. Blue Chew is an online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra, Cialis, and Levitra, but in a chewable tablet and at a fraction of the cost. The process is simple. Sign up at bluechew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers. Once you are approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. So if you are not showing up for your relationship in this important way, it's time to stop pretending it doesn't matter or that there's nothing you can do about it. Discover your options at bluechew.com. We've got a special offer for you. Try Blue Chew for free when you use the promo code EXCELLENCE at checkout. You'll just pay $5 shipping. That's bluechew.com, promo code EXCELLENCE to receive your first month free. Visit bluechew.com for more details and important safety information.
When my wife and I first heard about the iron thing, my wife takes everything to, she turns it up to 11. And she tried to sneak it in every possible way that we could. So first thing we did was cook it, and that's brutal. Yeah. Then she cooked it and diced it up so small that we started doing it like capsules. We would just put it on our tongue and then like swallow it. It's still terrible. Then she got to the point where she would take raw liver, freeze it, dice it up, and then put it in smoothies. So we were drinking raw frozen liver.
Yeah, you guys are hardcore. I'm proud of you.
No, she's hardcore.
So let me pause on that.
I'm the innocent victim.
The frozen liver, this is the way that before there were liver supplements, that was the way I used to hack getting people to do liver, was to freeze liver and cut it up into tiny little, essentially pill size pieces. Yep. Not the smoothie route, but just swallowing those frozen pills, and for people who just could not tolerate the taste or texture. So kudos to your wife. I think
she was doing all sorts of fermented things. That it was gnarly. That was a gnarly phase. Okay. So kind of what about people that hear this and they go, okay, Chris, I hear that, like, maybe we won't do, I kind of think of chicken as like the iceberg lettuce of the protein family. It's just like, it's there, but it tastes good. But we're suggesting all these red meats, but everyone hears the thing about red meat. And what about saturated fat and cholesterol?
Yeah. I think the best thing probably to do would be to go to my website, chriskresser.com, and download my free ebook on red meat, because there's so much to unpack here. We've been brainwashed for decades to believe that red meat is harmful for a number of different perspectives. Cholesterol, saturated fat, more recently, TMAO. There's heme iron content, lots of ways to attack red meat, but in the end, they don't add up. And there have been some recent studies that have been the largest, best controlled, longest term studies on the health impacts of fresh red meat and then processed red meat. So like salami and hot dogs and things like that. And these studies, both of these very large, well-controlled trials involving hundreds of thousands of participants over many years, found that there was no relationship between fresh red meat intake and cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or cancer. Or the relationships were so minuscule that they were unlikely to be anything more than chance. Processed meat, it's a little murkier, in part because if you think of people who eat a ton of processed meat, what else are they eating and doing?
Healthy user bias.
Yeah. Healthy user bias. And the studies that are good try to control for that, and some do a better job than others. So I'm still not sure about that. I mean, what I would say is that if someone is eating occasional, salami, bacon in the context of a really healthy diet where they're also eating lots of fruits and vegetables and plant foods and other nutrient dense foods, I'm not worried about that. Like I do that. But would I eat like salami and processed meat as my main, protein source, especially in the absent, like with a bun around the hot dog and a soda? No, I think there are some plausible mechanisms by which the way that meat is processed could, add risk. So I think in moderation, it's fine in the context of a healthy diet, but don't make it your go-to.
Patrick, I'm hijacking. I have 15 other questions. So do you want to sneak anyone in? Because I'll keep rolling.
Only one, and then I will happily let you get back to your many questions. All of this conversation has been, as it relates to nutrient deficiency, everything we've been talking about has been sort of the here's how you maybe tackle that. But how do you actually know? And maybe the answer is just we can assume that we are based on what we talked about at the start of this conversation. But how do we know? How can we feel? What are the symptoms, if that's the right word, to know like, oh, this is an issue? And I ask that because, looking at that list you gave us of, liver, spleen, that's a pretty big ask of a lot of people. And so I'm just curious, like, how do you get folks to recognize, oh, this is really a challenge or this is really an issue I want to tackle, so that the conversation about liver, even if it's in supplemental form, feels like one that they might be open to? In other words, like, how do you get them to recognize that, oh, this is really an issue and it might seem crazy, but here's the solution? Yeah,
it's a great question and a fair question. So, and lots of different ways to answer it. So let's start from the highest level. We know from statistics from groups like the Linus Pauling Institute at Oregon State University that is probably doing the best work in terms of quantifying how prevalent nutrient deficiency is in the US. I'll just give you their sort of fairly recent data. 100% of Americans don't get enough potassium. It's got to be like 99.9% that they rounded up, because there must be one or two people that are getting enough, but it's basically everybody. 94% don't get enough vitamin D, 92% don't get enough choline, 92% don't get enough magnesium, 89% don't get enough vitamin E. I could go on, but you get the drift here. We're not talking about like 1 out of every 50 people not getting enough. We're talking about the vast majority of people falling short of not just one, but several micronutrients. So going back to what you said initially, Patrick, yes, I think most people can assume that they are nutrient deficient without any testing or any even further exploration, because of all of the factors that we talked about at the beginning of the show. The second piece is there are tests that can be done for nutrient deficiency. Some tests are easier to get than others and more reliable than others. For example, a vitamin D blood test now is offered by just about every doctor, nurse practitioner. You can even order them online without a doctor's order, and they're very reliable. The number comes back, it's straightforward. You're either low or you're not, and it's cheap and relatively cheap and easy to test for. Other nutrients are more challenging. So calcium is a good example. Again, the level of calcium in our blood always should exist in a very narrow range. If it goes out of that range, we die. So the body will do everything it possibly can to keep it in that narrow range, including if you're not eating enough calcium, it will draw calcium out of the bones to maintain that serum calcium. This is why low calcium intakes are associated with osteoporosis and bone disease, because the body is taking it out of the bones in order to keep that narrow range of calcium in the blood, because the body is much more concerned with you not dying right now or tomorrow than it is with your long-term bone health, right? Mm-hmm. And so if you measure calcium in the serum and the value comes back normal, if you don't know this, you'd be like, awesome, normal calcium level, no problem. All that tells you is you're not dead and you're not going to the hospital. It doesn't tell you that your body's not drawing calcium out of your bones every day because you're not getting enough in your diet. So the testing is simple in some cases, but complex in others. And unfortunately, I don't know about you guys, but if most people go into their doctor, the doctor's not testing for nutrient levels. Outside of maybe vitamin D, maybe iron, and a couple basic nutrients, they're not doing a full nutrient panel. So again, because most people just don't have access to this level of testing, if you're working with a functional or integrative medicine provider who's doing that, awesome. I highly recommend that. You can get a much clearer idea of where you're at. But again, I treated hundreds of patients who were doing all the right things, and very, very few of them had optimal nutrient levels. So at this point, I think it's safe to assume that you're nutrient deficient. Then if you look at that list of foods that I provided, the top 10, if you're like, nope, I'm not eating any of those, foods or very few of those foods regularly, then that sort of tips the scale even further towards, like probably falling short if you have a chronic disease, which 6 in 10 Americans now do. 4 in 10 have multiple chronic diseases. I said that, how that interferes with nutrient absorption. So that tips you further into that scale. If you primarily buy your food from grocery stores, where it has been shipped from long distances before you buy it, that tips you further into that scale. If you have gut issues, IBS, ulcers like H. pylori, any of the common GI problems, you're going to be less likely to absorb nutrients from the food you eat. So that pushes you a little bit further. So this is kind of, it sounds maybe low tech, but it's kind of the best way to get a sense of where you are on that spectrum. And then, if you have a number of the factors that add up to nutrient, the higher probability of nutrient deficiency, this is where supplements play a big role. And, I said at the beginning, I wish we lived in a world where we could meet all of our nutrient needs from food, but we're not in that world anymore, even in the best case scenario. And a lot of people are not in the best case scenario. So supplements can really help fill the gap. And that's why I launched my supplement line last year, was to just provide people with the daily nutrients they need in the most bioavailable forms, so they don't have to worry about it and try to figure this stuff out on their own, which is really, really challenging.
What are you drinking right now? You have a cup. What's in your cup?
This is matcha. So it's a type of green tea that also is high in L-theanine, which is, so tea has caffeine, and I'm a little bit caffeine sensitive, but the L-theanine is very relaxing. And so the combination of the L-theanine, which is just naturally present in matcha, and the caffeine is a nice afternoon drink for me, because it sort of has a mental, it sharpens my mind and helps me get through the afternoon, but it doesn't give me the jitter. Like if I was to have a cup of coffee right now, I wouldn't sleep very well later tonight. So it's a nice alternative to that.
It's like an upper and a downer in one cup.
Exactly.
It's like having a Red Bull vodka.
Thinking I was going to say tequila.
My wife was hoping you would.
I like tequila. I have to say it's my favorite.
Okay. So if we were to rank order alcohols, what's the healthiest alcohol?
Yeah, I would say like spirits are, especially for people who are watching sugar intake, spirits are good in small or moderate amounts. Vodka, gin, tequila, wine is resveratrol and lots of polyphenols and can be healthy from that perspective. But
is it true that you would have to drink like 20 bottles of red wine to get the active dosage of
I don't think
resveratrol?
so. No, I think it just depends. I think there are maintenance levels of these compounds that we would be exposed to in a normal diet. And then there are therapeutic ranges of these compounds that you might take to address a particular health problem, but that would really be would have been impossible for our ancestors to get any other way than supplementation. So, wine and even like berries and foods are going to give you that maintenance level of these phytonutrients. Whereas if you're trying to supplement to achieve a particular result, then you're going to get much higher levels. And I think both have use depending on what the goal is.
Okay, I have 3 more things to hit, and then I'd like to do like a little quick rapid thing. First one is kids. Kids are I have kids. Patrick has kids. Do you have kids?
I do. I have a daughter. She's 11 years old.
Perfect. So how do you get kids to eat well?
Lock them up.
Yeah.
Don't let them leave the house.
My kid, one of my kids would be fine with eating everything, and then would just like wither away to nothing.
Yeah, until they're 18, never let them leave the house. And then if they refuse to eat something healthy, just don't let them eat anything else. And eventually they'll get hungry enough, and then they'll eat the healthy food.
There we have it, guys. Chris Kresser on the podcast. Thank you so much, Chris.
No, so I'll give you a few sort of tips and then just a bigger picture view. Like when our daughter was born, I was already well into this work. Both my wife and I eat really well. We never fed her separate meals. So we always had the same meal as a family. And if she didn't want to eat some part of that meal, we didn't say, okay, eat that broccoli or else you're not going to get this or this other thing. We always just put food down and let her eat whatever she wanted to eat of that meal. But we didn't like pour her a bowl of Fruit Loops if she was not willing to eat what we made for dinner. And so she, through that way, just learned that like, this is what food is. These are the meals. And if I want, I'm going to eat, then this is what I'm going to eat. I think that's really important. And I think it's a really slippery slope if you start to provide different foods for kids. Like, here's your chicken fingers and fries while we're eating, this healthy meal over here, then that's really hard to overcome. Another tip is to realize that kids' palates are different than adults' palates, and to actually take steps to make the food more appetizing for them. So our daughter, for example, loves broccoli with cheese on it. And I think dairy is a healthy food when it's well tolerated. We have no problem putting some butter and cheese on the broccoli so that she will eat it. That's perfectly fine in my view, and even might help with the absorption of nutrients because some of the nutrients are fat soluble. So just a little bit of extra effort to make foods that you might like plain more appetizing for kids. And then the third thing, like our daughter grew up eating liver and sauerkraut, and like sauerkraut, she still will like eat half a bottle of it if it's out on the table. But her diet is way more limited now than it was when she was like 3 or 4 or 5. By limited, I mean she's way pickier than she used to be. A lot of foods that she used to like, she doesn't like anymore. And that was disappointing and frustrating for us at first. And me being me, it would be hard for me to accept that. And at the same time, I know through research and also talking with people who have, work with kids, that it's natural for that to happen at around this age. Like when kids get to be 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, their palate really does get more restricted in most cases. And then it tends to expand again as they get into the teenage years and go from there. So part of it is like me learning not to stress as much about it and not be really aggro, and because the more we push kids, we all know this as parents, what you resist persists, right? So if you get into a battle with kids around food, that's probably one that you're going to lose over time, especially as they get outside the house and start to have more freedom and autonomy. We still provide the good meals and healthy food for her at home, but we realize it's not going to be perfect.
Cool. Okay. 2 more. Fasting, both time restricted and, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day fasts. What's your take?
All potentially have a role. There's lots of good research supporting fasting. In fact, there's a saying in the medical community that fasting is the cure for all disease because it's that it can just have remarkable effects. But it's not for everybody. Fasting is a hormetic, has a hormetic effect, which means it induces, it's a stressor on the body, but it can be a positive stressor that induces a positive adaptation. So weightlifting and exercise is the same thing. Like when you're lifting weights, you're tearing your muscle fibers. How is that good? Well, when they rebuild stronger. So it's this positive adaptation. The same is true with fasting. That works pretty well if you're already in a pretty stable place. But if you're, for example, a mom who has kids, who's also working outside the home, who's doing CrossFit 3 times a week, who's sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night, who's not eating enough calories, who's under a ton of stress. You've got all of those other stressors. She's already below baseline. If you add fasting onto that, that's too much additional stress and it's not going to be beneficial. So it's a case by case basis. I think generally if you're doing pretty well, sleeping well, exercising, recovering well from exercise, you can layer that in and it's helpful.
Okay. Quick little rapid fire, 5 or 6 different things. See if you can answer in 1 or 2 sentences. Take on soy.
Fine in small amounts. Don't have too much because it can wreak havoc on hormones in large amounts.
Collagen as a supplement.
It's great, and most people don't get enough of it in their diet, and it helps balance out other types of protein that we eat.
Antioxidants, meaning like foods that the manufacturers add and promote antioxidants, as opposed to like getting antioxidants through like blueberries.
Similar to what I said about resveratrol, it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. I think getting as much from food as possible is good. And then if you, have specific, like if you're under a lot of oxidative stress, then adding supplementation can be helpful.
And organic, is it worth it? Organic fraud? Is it like, do we know?
It's worth it in the vast majority of cases. And I would say local is as important or even more important.
Skim milk.
Full fat dairy has been shown to be more beneficial for metabolic and cardiovascular health because of unique fatty acids that are present in dairy fat.
Cool. Okay, Patrick, I'm good.
No, you're good. Chris, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you guys. It was really fun. Enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you so much for joining us this week here on the show. Thank you to Chris for his time. Again, if you want to learn more about Chris and what he's working on, check out Kresser.com. One more reminder, if you are not yet subscribed or following, please do. If this episode resonated with you and you know somebody who might appreciate it, please do consider sending them a note and recommending they check it out. Ben and I will be back next week for another episode of Chasing Excellence.